It's weirdly sort of appropriate to finish the fabulous day that we've had with a talk about death and dying. About you and me and the inevitability of our own passing. But actually, this is not so much a talk about us stopping, it's more about us starting, and how by embracing the mystery of our life and our death, and by coming to terms with our own mortality, we can live a fuller life, full of purpose and full of love. This is a photograph of my parents. It's on their wedding day in 1952 in Tel Aviv in Israel. Both of my parents lost their parents and most of their families in the Holocaust. My mother survived her childhood in Auschwitz and the death march that followed, and my father 5 years fighting with the Polish army based out of London. I know for them, and I suspect for you, and I know for myself, that I came to this place, to this world, imbued with the spirit of my ancestors. And in everything that I do, and in each moment of time, I add to my own present and my future. And that when it's my turn to go, if I am lucky, it will be those that love me, my children perhaps, I hope, who will carry me into their future, and perhaps that's the best we can hope for. When I was thinking about this talk, I didn't think so much about the future. I thought much more about the past, and in particular some of the enduring truths and whakatoki of our First Nations. And many of you will be familiar with this Mason Jury's model of health and wellness for Māori, Te Whare Tapawhā. It's a holistic model that encompasses much more than just physical well-being. It includes the well-being of the family, the mind, and importantly, the spirit. And another whakatoki, he aha te mea nui o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. What's the most important thing in the world? It is people, it is people, it is people. And one more, ka mua ka muri, that we walk into the future facing backwards. Or as Soren Kierkegaard said, we understand backwards, but we are forced to live our life forward. That sense that the future is somewhat unwritten, and that there are clues to it from our past. These kinds of things have been quite helpful to me in my sort of journey through medicine, and I think they might be helpful for us to consider as we go through this talk, which is, I think, more about living than dying, to tell you the truth. Now, when I was incredibly young, I thought I would live forever. I didn't talk about death or dying much. I didn't consider it, nor illness and suffering. And in fact, if I was ever to be threatened by something like that, as it happened for my ancestors in the time of the ancient pharaohs, the angel of death would pass over my house and I would be spared. Actually, I don't believe that anymore. My first encounter with the death and dying process, though, came at medical school when I was a student. And I still remember the profound sense of disbelief that I had when I looked down at those tiny, dark nuclei inside those cancer cells so far away at the end of that microscope. And my sense of disbelief that they could bring us down in that terrible process that is the progressive weight loss and fatigue, that inexorable turning up of our toes until we die. Oh my God, here I am at the late afternoon of my medical career, and I still actually don't understand how that happens. But I've come to realize that I don't need to understand that. I sort of just need to accept that it does. Another photograph of my parents, 1986, this time taken in the back garden of my home in London. My father died in Wellington 4 years after this photograph was taken. He was 77 years old. I was 34 and just recently returned to New Zealand and was working at Auckland Hospital before I moved to Middlemore, where I now work. Although my father's death was not unexpected, it rocked me in all sorts of different ways. First of all, that sense of disbelief that he was dead and could be gone forever. A terrible sense of guilt because I could have been a better son to him. A sense of sadness for not knowing more about his extraordinary life, and that nagging regret for all those things left unsaid. But perhaps mostly, and perhaps selfishly, the thing that really struck me was that this was the first time I had to really face up to the ephemeral nature of life. and start coming to terms with my own mortality. The sight of my father's body in that funeral home that soon after became a car yard still haunts me. That look on his face in death, one he never had in life. The funeral he had in the freezing rain at Makara on the south coast of Wellington. The calming effect of our ritual, the singing of the Kaddish, the horror of the drip, drip, drip of the rain into that puddle in the corner of his grave, the thud of the red clay on the coffin. Those things stayed with me for months and for years until I could turn away from my fear of death and start to concentrate on living a purposeful life. We are, all of us, a speck in this planet, in this universe. We exist for a millisecond in a vast expanse of time, and if the past has anything to go by, time will continue into a future that we barely can foresee or comprehend. Into that continuance, many of us have come, and all of us will go, because life is a zero-sum game. If there's one thing we are good at, us human beings, we're good at dying. We hit that target 100% of the time. So if we come, we will go. And as sad as that might be, and as much as our loved ones try to hold on to us, in time too, we will eventually become increasingly lost from them. And that pattern will continue and continue until we are a species no more, perhaps because we have no habitable place to live. Now, I am an intensive care doctor. I work with the living, although many of my patients are skirting their own death. I work with their families, and I work with their friends. And invariably, these people face their situation with a strength and a resilience and a dignity that is absolutely outstanding. But too often I see the same sense of regret, sadness, and disbelief that I felt at the death of my father. The ICU is a crucible, a place where there's a great swirl of emotion and intensity, deep reflection, the ebb and flow of all sorts of different things, conflict and resolution. And we are there with these people, a temporary guest in their lives, to guide them, to help them to understand, to judge their pace, to edge them forward. And whether their loved one lives or dies, our role is to keep them together, to make them better, to help them to know, and for them to go away knowing and to live a good and purposeful life. So there are so many stories, it's really hard to know where to begin. Last week, a young woman going about her everyday work suddenly looked pained, put a hand up to her head, and dropped to the ground, deeply unconscious. The cause, a cerebral hemorrhage from an undiagnosed aneurysm. By the time she reached hospital, she had fixed and dilated pupils. 18 hours later, she was declared brain dead. The next morning, her lungs, her heart, her liver, and her kidneys were being transplanted into 5 complete strangers. In a moment, people's lives are turned upside down and inside out. Families and friends are changed forever. The longest day and night of their lives, a journey that is so deep. These families are really magnificent, and we are there alongside them. And together, we see the light as clear as it can ever be. And it's their affirmation of life in the face of the darkness of death. These moments are so profound, they are indescribable. And to be a witness to that kind of stuff is just awesome. Intensive care doctors are often called to assess critically ill patients at all times of the day and night, people that we've never met before, and increasingly now the frail and the elderly. When I was a young doctor, I felt under enormous pressure to intervene. The families were there, their friends, all waiting, expecting the doctor to come to make sense of the situation they're in and to make things better. And when I was young, it was really tough. I just felt they wanted me to do stuff, and I did stuff, so I intervened, I did things. I pulled the trigger on all those things that I was trained to do. But I know better now. In circumstances like that, I spend much more time taking stock of talking to those families, listening to them, to learn and understand more about that patient, the life that they have and what they value. And when you do that, in every case, the right treatment path emerges. And invariably, it's to do less rather than to do more. A while back, I spent quite a bit of time working in Samoa, where I met my friend Mary. Now, Mary came into the hospital with a life-threatening infection, was close to death. According to her daughter, Mary was already quite frail. She was 78. And in her younger life, though, she had run and looked after the family business, now managed by the daughter. It was a small hotel down by the port in Apia, with quite nice views over the harbour to watch the ships from the second-floor balconies. And in her younger days, Mary would scoot up those stairs and do the things that she needed to do. But as she got older, she started to take the elevator. But in the last 18 months or so, Mary was pretty well confined to the front desk. But Mary enjoyed her life, and according to her daughter, she knew how to live, and really importantly, she knew how she wanted to die. So we had a discussion, and we decided that we would take Mary up to the little ICU there. And we did really simple things as well as we possibly could. We gave her oxygen, we gave her fluids, we gave her some antibiotics, a few drugs here and there. And we fine-tuned things, always trying to keep an eye on her comfort, making sure she was comfortable. And we decided to wait and see which way she turned. 24 hours later, she was a little bit better. 48 hours later, she was in a chair. 10 days later, she was at home. And here she is on the day of her 80th birthday 2 years later. Working with the frail and the elderly is one of the great challenges for modern medicine. It's more about the art than it is about the science. It's about how do we customize all that we know and all that we can do to the individual needs of that really difficult group. It's about treading softly on that line between treatment and torture. And invariably, it's about doing less rather than more. As robust and strong as we are here today, with our lives so full and so much already achieved and so much more to look forward to in the future, it's hard to believe that one day we'll be gone. Not just for a holiday, or ducking out for a smoke or a cup of coffee. I mean, gone for good. There are lots of people who just can't get their heads around that, and they put their sort of eggs in the afterlife basket. Now, I don't think that's such a smart move, because I think that just reduces the intensity of their lives in the here and now. What is the time now? It's 6:05 on the 28th of October, 2017. I reckon by now 107 billion people have come and gone from this place. You would have thought that if there was an afterlife, we would have heard about it. Think about this, all of those letters, emails, and texts stacked up against the post office door on death's side. You would have thought that one of them would have made it through the crack from the darkness to the light. A letter from a dead mother to a grieving child, from a dead child to a grieving mother. But no, I don't believe there's ever been a postcard. And I've not heard from my mother who wanted to know everything about me all of the time. David, she would say, are you happy? Oh. David, will you be home for dinner? Would you like me to put some food aside for you? Do you still like gefilte fish? If there was one thing that could transcend death, surely it would be the anxiety of my mother. But no, not a word. So it seems to me that life is very much about the here and now. It's about our earthly minds and our earthly bodies living on this, our heavenly earth. Here's my mother. This photo on the 3rd of May 2009, it's her 80th birthday, and it's taken at the Wellesley Club in McGinnity Street in Wellington. She died 2 years later. I was with her during her final illness and looked after her at her home in Wellington for the last couple of months of that terrible cancer. She hung on as survivors do, unwilling to give up, until in a moment of surrender, death came for her. My mother, like people so close to death, maintained a radiance and a warmth all the way to the end, and suddenly it was gone. Her spirit, they say 20 grams of it, took off like a bird. A little while later, her body was cremated, and a while later, her ashes were interred in my father's grave in Makara. The spirit of my mother and the spirit of my father live on in me. I know that and I can feel that. Now, you might say I am a man of science, but I am also not, because I'm just like you. And none of us are immune from the mystery of death. It will always overwhelm anything that we pretend to know. I had a patient once who had a near-death experience. She described it to me like this. The colors were really, really bright. My eyesight was sharp. I looked down on my battered body and I heard a voice and it said, "It's not your time." So I went back. Death is such a mystery, a child on a ghost train, the one big thing we will have to face one by one and all alone. 22 years passed between the death of my father and the death of my mother. And during that time, I was forced to grow up. I learnt a lot about life, and I learnt a bit about death. For me, life is about us. It's about you, it's about me, it's about us together. It's about how we value each other and how we look after each other. It's also about how we look after the environment that sustains us. We come into this world imbued with the spirits of our ancestors in everything that we do, and in each moment we add to our present and to our future. And if we are lucky, it will be our children or those who love us that will carry us into theirs. So the question for each of us is this: how will I choose to live and make the most of my one unique, precious life? Thank you.